My sister-in-law reported me to the police for not seeing her text, but when she lost her house, her job, and her entire family. Now she's begging for my forgiveness and was left broken. I'm 34 years old. I've been working with kids for over a decade. And what happened with my sister-in-law, Rebecca, a few years ago almost destroyed my career and, I'm not going to lie, basically ended any possibility of our family ever being normal again. The thing is, when all this started in March 2020, when the world turned upside down with the pandemic and we were all trying to figure out how to manage working from home and kids without school, Rebecca and I made an agreement that seemed perfect. When she would watch my kids 3 days a week, and I would watch hers the other 2 days. Like a fair exchange where nobody had to pay for daycare and the cousins could spend time together. I sounded ideal, right? And for 3 full years, it worked pretty well. I mean, we had our differences because Rebecca has always been a bit intense and dramatic, but nothing that couldn't be handled with a little patience. Rebecca is married to my brother Andrew. They have 2 kids, who at that time were like 5 and 7. And from the beginning of their relationship, I always noticed that Rebecca had that personality of everything has to be my way or no deal. Andrew is one of those people who prefers to keep the peace at any cost, so he basically agrees with her on everything and avoids conflicts, which probably explains why things escalated so much afterwards. My own kids were 6 and 9 when we started the arrangement, and honestly, I loved that they spent time with their cousins. I felt like we were building those family memories that I had when I was a kid. My mom was also happy because she saw the grandkids more often. Though looking back, I should have paid more attention to certain signs that Rebecca wasn't exactly the most trustworthy or reasonable person in the world. During those 3 years, there were awkward moments. Sure, like when Rebecca would complain that my kids ate too much at her house, or when she insisted that I had to bring extra diapers and specific snacks even though she never did the same when my kids went to my house. But I just took a deep breath and let it go because, whatever. It was family and the arrangement benefited us both. We both worked from home. She did some freelance marketing, and I managed after-school programs remotely. So having that mutual support was literally what allowed us to keep our jobs and our sanity. The kids got along pretty well. They fought like all cousins, but nothing out of the ordinary, and I thought we were in a good dynamic. Everything went to hell over a stupid argument that I don't even remember well what it was about. I think it was something about Rebecca saying I had been late picking up my kids one day, even though I had texted her that I was on my way and she said she hadn't seen it. Or something like that. It was ridiculous. I mean, the kind of thing 2 normal people resolve in 5 minutes with a conversation, but Rebecca took it as if I had personally insulted her. She sent me like 3 long messages explaining why I was being disrespectful of her time and how she was always punctual, and I needed to be more considerate. And I basically responded that it was fine, that I'd be more careful, because I didn't want to start a war over something so small. But then, like 2 days after that silly conversation, I had one of those hellish days at work where everything went wrong. I had a meeting that ran longer than planned, then a problem with a vendor, then my boss needed to talk to me urgently about I don't know what, and when I could finally breathe and look at the clock, it was already 3:45 and I had to get the kids to Rebecca's house before 4, like we always did. I grabbed my kids, basically threw them in the car running, drove the 15 minutes to her house, and dropped them off at the door. I rang the doorbell, waited a few seconds. The kids went in because the door was open like always, and I went back to my house because I had another work call in 20 minutes. What? I didn't know. Because I had been so busy. I hadn't even looked at my phone in the last 2 hours. Is that Rebecca had sent me a text at 2:30 saying she wasn't going to be able to watch the kids that day. Just that, no explanation, no apologies, just can't today. And I didn't see it. I got home, made myself a quick coffee, logged into my next meeting, and like 20 minutes later, I started getting calls from a number I didn't know. I didn't answer because I was in the meeting, but they kept calling, and I finally put my mic on mute and answered, kind of annoyed, thinking it was spam or something. It was the police. They told me I needed to return to my sister-in-law's house immediately because there was a situation with my kids. My heart dropped to my stomach. I literally felt like I was going to faint. I hung up the work call without even explaining anything and drove back to Rebecca's house faster than I should probably admit. When I arrived, there were 2 patrol cars, parked outside with their lights on, neighbors peeking out the windows, and my 2 kids sitting on the front porch crying with a police officer standing next to them. Rebecca was at her front door with her arms crossed, talking to another officer, and when she saw me arrive, she gave me this look of satisfaction and superiority that still makes my blood boil when I remember it. Turns out Rebecca, instead of simply calling me or sending me another text or knocking on her own door to tell me the kids couldn't stay, decided to call the police and report me for child abandonment. She accused me of leaving my kids on her property without her consent, knowing perfectly well that she had said she couldn't watch them that day. She told the police I was negligent, that I had put my kids in danger, and that she feared for their safety. All this while my poor kids, who are 6 and 9 years old, are sitting on a porch not understanding what the hell is happening, seeing police lights and wondering if their mom is going to jail. The officers were pretty reasonable when I arrived and explained the whole situation to them. I showed them the text messages where Rebecca and I confirmed our mutual care arrangement that we had been doing for 3 years. I explained that I hadn't seen her last-minute message because I was working, and that I would never in my life leave my kids somewhere if I knew they weren't welcome. Rebecca tried to insist I was lying, that she had given me enough notice, but the officers basically told her this was clearly a communication problem between family and that calling the police over something like this was a huge overreaction. They didn't file any formal reports. Thank God. Because if they had, I probably would have lost my job, considering I work with kids and anything related to negligence or abandonment would have destroyed me professionally. I got my kids in the car, both still crying and asking me why there were police and why Aunt Rebecca was angry, and drove back home shaking with pure rage. I couldn't believe that someone, especially someone from my own family, had tried to screw up my life like that over something so stupid. And the worst part is, she put my kids, her own nephews, in a scary and traumatic situation that was completely unnecessary. When we got home, I explained to them as best I could that everything was okay, that Mommy hadn't done anything wrong, that sometimes adults have misunderstandings, but I could see in their faces that something had changed. My oldest son asked me if we were going to keep going to Aunt Rebecca's house, and I told him no, that from now on we would find another arrangement. That same night, I blocked Rebecca on everything. Phone, social media, email, everything. I sent her one last message before blocking her saying that our childcare arrangement was permanently over, that what she had done was unforgivable, and that I never wanted to speak to her again in my life. I didn't apologize for not seeing her message because, seriously? Who calls the police before simply trying to contact the person again? She knew perfectly well I was working, knew I was probably busy, and decided to go for the nuclear option immediately. It became crystal clear to me that she did it not because she was worried about the kids, but because she wanted to punish me for our stupid argument days before. And that's something I can't and won't forgive. 2 days later, Andrew called me. He started with the typical spiel of, "But Rebecca is also stressed. And you know how she is when she feels attacked. And I think you both can resolve this like adults." I cut him off mid-speech and told him exactly what I thought. That his wife almost destroyed my career, traumatized my kids, and showed she's a vindictive and dangerous person who doesn't deserve one more second of my time. Andrew tried to defend the indefensible, saying Rebecca had misinterpreted the situation and was just protecting her space. And I told him if that was his version of events, then he was crazy too. He told me Rebecca had had to quit her job because without my help she couldn't manage childcare and her job at the same time, and that basically I was responsible for their financial situation now. Can you believe it? I mean, Rebecca calls the police on me, tries to get me arrested, puts my kids in emotional danger, and somehow I'm the bad guy for not wanting to keep helping her after that. I told Andrew that Rebecca's childcare problems weren't my problem, that she created this situation completely on her own with her actions, and that if she needed help, she should look for a daycare like the rest of the world. I hung up the phone and blocked Andrew too, because I didn't have the energy to deal with his attitude of, "But think about family and we all need to make sacrifices." What happened next was even worse, though it didn't affect me directly but my mom. Turns out Rebecca, after quitting her job because supposedly she couldn't find anyone to watch the kids, started taking them to my mom's house 3 days a week. She didn't ask her. They didn't make any formal agreement. Rebecca just showed up one day with the kids and told my mom she had to go out and would be back in a few hours. My mom, who is the sweetest and most accommodating person in the world, said yes because, well, they're her grandkids, and she's never known how to say no to anyone. But 3 days a week became full days, from 8 in the morning to 6 at night, with Rebecca basically using my mom as free daycare while she did who knows what because she wasn't even working anymore. My mom is 67 years old. She's retired, has some minor health problems like high blood pressure that she normally controls well with medication, and definitely doesn't have the energy to be watching two kids full-time 3 times a week. But Rebecca didn't care. She kept dropping off the kids, and my mom kept accepting because she felt bad saying no. I didn't find out about this until like a month later when I went to visit my mom and found her completely exhausted. She literally looked gray and tired in a way that scared me. I asked her what was wrong, and at first she didn't want to tell me, but she finally admitted that Rebecca was using her as a babysitter and that she was starting to feel overwhelmed but didn't know how to tell her no. I got furious. Not with my mom, but with Rebecca and Andrew, who clearly knew perfectly well what they were doing. I told my mom she needed to set boundaries, that her health was more important than free childcare for Rebecca. But my mom is from that generation that believes family always helps no matter what. So she kept saying things like, "But they're my grandkids, and Rebecca is going through a hard time, and I don't want to cause problems." I tried to reason with her, explaining that Rebecca wasn't going through a hard time. Rebecca had created her own disaster and now was exploiting everyone around her. But my mom is too good to see manipulation. Things continued like that for another 2 months, until one day my mom ended up in the hospital. Andrew called me from my mom's cell phone because I guess my number was in her emergency contacts, and he told me mom had had an episode of dangerously high blood pressure, and they had taken her to the emergency room. I drove to the hospital immediately, and when I arrived, I found my mom in a bed with monitors, and my brother sitting next to her trying to look concerned. The doctors said her pressure had been at numbers of literally you could have a stroke at any moment, and that she needed to reduce her stress level immediately or the consequences could be serious. I waited until the doctor left, and then looked at Andrew and asked him directly where Rebecca was and why she wasn't there if supposedly my mom spent half her week watching Rebecca's kids. Andrew got uncomfortable and said Rebecca was at home with the kids, and I exploded. I told him his wife was literally killing our mother with stress, that the doctor had just said mom needed to rest, and that if Rebecca dropped one more kid at mom's house, I would personally call Child Protective Services. Andrew tried to defend himself, saying they didn't know mom was so stressed that she had never complained, and I told him that was no excuse for abusing the kindness of a 6-7-year-old woman who should already be enjoying her retirement in peace. My mom got out of the hospital that day with a serious warning from the doctor and a new prescription for her blood pressure, but 2 weeks later she ended up back in the emergency room. This time it was even worse. The pressure was so high that the doctor told her directly that there were signs she might be close to a stroke, and that if she didn't make drastic changes in her life immediately, the odds were very bad. I was there when the doctor explained this, and I saw my mom start crying, saying she was sorry, that she would try to do less, and I took her hand and told her she didn't have to apologize for anything, that this wasn't her fault. After that second hospital visit, my mom finally gathered the courage to call Rebecca and tell her she couldn't keep watching the kids. I wasn't there when she made the call, but my mom told me later that Rebecca got furious, yelled at her that she was leaving her without options, that she depended on that help, that mom was being selfish. My mom, who had just gotten out of the hospital with stroke warnings, being called selfish for setting basic boundaries. It made me want to drive to Rebecca's house and tell her exactly what I thought. But I restrained myself because I knew it would only make things worse. You'd think after that conversation Rebecca would respect the boundary, right? Well, no. 3 days later, she showed up at my mom's house with the kids, rang the doorbell, and when mom opened the door, Rebecca literally pushed the kids forward and said she had an important appointment and would be back in a few hours. My mom tried to tell her she couldn't, that the doctor had told her no. But Rebecca was already walking back to her car. Mom called me crying, saying she didn't know what to do, that the kids were there and she couldn't just leave them alone, and I told her to stay with them, but that I was coming over immediately. When I got to my mom's house, Rebecca still hadn't returned. We waited 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. The kids were playing with no idea of all the drama. My mom was sitting on the couch looking completely exhausted, and I was getting more and more furious. Finally, like at 5 in the afternoon, Rebecca came back all casual like nothing happened, and I went out to confront her before she could enter the house. I told her what she was doing was unacceptable, that mom had set a clear boundary and she was completely ignoring it, and that if she dropped the kids here again without permission, I would personally call the police and report her for child abandonment. Rebecca laughed in my face. She literally laughed and said I had no authority to threaten her, that mom was an adult who could make her own decisions, and that if mom really didn't want to watch the kids, then she could say so herself. I pointed out that mom had already said it and that Rebecca was simply ignoring her, but Rebecca just shook her head, picked up her kids, and left saying, "We'd talk again when I was being more reasonable." Reasonable. After her behavior almost killed my mom, I was the one who needed to be more reasonable. I told my mom that same afternoon that next time Rebecca showed up with the kids, don't open the door. If she left them on the porch, to call me immediately, and I would call the police. My mom looked conflicted and guilty, but finally agreed because I think she finally understood that her health had to be a priority. And exactly as I predicted, 2 days later, Rebecca showed up again. My mom didn't open the door, and Rebecca literally left the kids on the porch and drove away. My mom called me hysterical, saying the kids were outside and she didn't know what to do. And I told her to let them in so they'd be safe, but that I was going to call the police immediately. I called the police non-emergency number and explained the situation, that my sister-in-law had left her minor children with my mother, who had explicitly said she couldn't watch them for medical reasons, and that this constituted child abandonment. They sent a patrol car, talked to my mom, took pictures of the kids waiting on the porch, and tried to contact Rebecca by phone. Rebecca didn't answer the first 3 calls, but when she finally answered the 4th, she acted surprised, saying she thought Mom had agreed to watch them and that this was a misunderstanding. The officers were clear with her. They told her she couldn't leave her kids with someone who hadn't given consent, and that if she did it again, there would be serious legal consequences. After that, I thought Rebecca would finally get the message, but I completely underestimated her level of denial and entitlement. Instead of finding actual childcare or, I don't know, staying home with her own kids since she wasn't working, she started fighting constantly with Andrew. Neighbors told us later that there was screaming almost every day, that Rebecca blamed Andrew for not making enough money to pay for a nanny, that Andrew blamed Rebecca for having ruined their relationship with his own family, who used to help them for free, and that basically their marriage was falling apart in real time. Andrew started staying at my mom's house some nights when the fights were too intense. He'd show up with a small bag and a kicked puppy face saying he just needed a break for one night, and my mom, because she's an angel of a person, always let him stay in the guest room. I told Mom she had to set boundaries with Andrew too, that she couldn't become the refuge for their dysfunctional marriage, but she insisted that Andrew was her son, and she couldn't kick him out when he was clearly suffering. One night became 2, 2 became 3, and suddenly Andrew was basically living with my mom more than with his own wife. According to Andrew, Rebecca had become impossible to live with. She spent all their savings on, I don't know what, probably trying to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford without her income, and then would get angry at Andrew for not being able to make up the difference with his salary. Their fights were about money, about childcare, about the fact that Andrew's family no longer spoke to them because of how Rebecca had treated everyone, and basically about everything. The kids were obviously being affected by all this. Andrew mentioned that his older daughter's teacher had called concerned about behavioral changes, but Rebecca didn't even want to discuss the idea of family therapy or marriage counseling because she insisted all the problems were other people's fault, never hers. The situation eventually became financially unsustainable. Without Rebecca's income, and with Andrew having to pay for actual childcare that turned out to be much more expensive than anyone had anticipated, they simply couldn't maintain their house. They started falling behind on the mortgage, then on credit cards, then on basically everything. Andrew told me this one night when he was at Mom's house. He looked completely defeated and admitted they were probably going to lose the house, and he didn't know what to do. Part of me felt sorry for him because he's my brother and he's obviously suffering. But a bigger part of me was thinking, this is exactly what happens when you allow your toxic wife to abuse everyone around her without consequences. Like 6 months after the original police incident, Rebecca and Andrew ended up moving back in with Rebecca's parents, who live like 3 hours away. They had to do a short sale on the house, completely ruined their credit, and basically lost everything. The kids had to change schools mid-year, leave their friends, leave their extended family, all because Rebecca couldn't accept responsibility for her own actions and find reasonable solutions to her childcare problems. Andrew called me the day before the move to say goodbye, and honestly, I didn't know what to say to him. I wasn't going to say I was sorry things turned out this way because, well, I wasn't. This was entirely caused by Rebecca's decisions and Andrew's inability to set boundaries with her. It's been almost 2 years since they moved, and I haven't had any contact with Rebecca since that day. With the police on her porch, Andrew messages me occasionally with updates about the kids, birthday pictures, and stuff like that. And I respond because they're my nephews, and I love them, despite everything. But I keep the conversations very superficial. My mom is much better now without the constant stress. Her blood pressure went back to normal numbers, and the doctor is happy with her progress. She says she misses seeing the grandkids more often but understands why things are the way they are, and I think she's secretly relieved to never have to deal with Rebecca again. My own kids asked for a while why they didn't see their cousins anymore, and I explained in an age-appropriate way that sometimes adults have disagreements that make families spend less time together. But that doesn't mean we don't love them. They've mostly stopped asking, though my older son sometimes mentions that he misses playing with his cousin, and it breaks my heart. But I also know I can't risk my kids' emotional safety by exposing them to Rebecca's toxicity. Last week, Andrew sent me a message saying he and Rebecca are in marriage counseling, that they're trying to work on their problems, and that Rebecca wants to eventually reconnect with the family and apologize for everything. I responded that I was glad they were seeking help, but that I personally wasn't interested in reconnecting with Rebecca under any circumstances, that what she did was unforgivable, and that some things simply can't be repaired. He didn't respond after that, and that's okay. I've made my peace with the fact that I'm probably never going to have a normal relationship with my brother as long as he stays with Rebecca, and while it's sad, it's also necessary for my own mental health and my kids. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have tried harder, but then I remember my kids crying on that porch with police lights flashing on their faces, and I know I did the right thing. I remember my mom in the hospital with stroke warnings from the stress Rebecca caused her, and I know I did the right thing. Rebecca had multiple opportunities to be reasonable, to apologize, to acknowledge that her actions had consequences, and at every opportunity she chose drama, manipulation, and victimization. That's not something you can fix with an apology and a little therapy. That's a fundamental character problem. My life is calmer now without all that drama. Working with kids is still what I'm passionate about, and fortunately the police incident never affected my career because no formal charges were filed. My kids are well and adjusted, and my mom is healthy and happy. It's weird having a brother you barely talk to and nephews who live hours away that you probably won't see grow up, but that's how things are sometimes. Not all family stories have happy endings where everyone forgives each other and moves on together. Sometimes the best decision you can make for your family is to cut out toxic people completely, even when those people are technically family too.